via WebEx teleconference. It is also available to the public via video stream online at the County Council website. The Council will conduct a series of work sessions and public hearings to review and obtain public comment on the proposed HOCO by Design. Today's session covers Chapter 3, Ecological Health, Appendix A, Environment, and the Fiscal Impact Analysis. The Council will host public hearings in July and September. A complete calendar of Council meetings regarding the general plan can be found on the Council's website. I should mention at the outset that Ms. Rigby can't be here today because she is not feeling well, and Ms. Walsh is attending virtually, but I will do the roll call. And I believe Dr. Jones is not joining us, and Mr. Youngman will be joining us later. So although there are not three of us here, we have discussed whether or not we can proceed without a quorum, and we have been informed that we can for a work session. So I will call the roll call. Ms. Walsh.
I am here.
Excellent. I don't believe anybody else is, so I'm not going to just keep calling. All right. So we will now proceed with our agenda, starting with ecological health, and I believe you have a presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Council.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Good morning, members of the Council. We're happy to be here today for our fourth work session, and we're joined with our usual team from the Department of Planning and Zoning, including Kate Bollinger, Jessica Bella, and Kristen O'Connor is joining us online. We're also joined by our consultant, Matt Noonkester. He is virtual as well. And we have staff from various county agencies who are subject matter experts in the topics that will be presented to you today, including Mark Richmond from the Department of Public Works, Lindsay DiMarzo, Bill Mahoney, Julie Constantino from the Office of Community Sustainability. And today we're joined by Joy Levy and Susan Overstreet from our Division of Resource Conservation within DPZ. And also Chad Edmondson is here from DPZ because we're going to get into some policies related to stormwater management. So if we have any questions for him, as he's from our engineering division, he's available as well. And then, as Councilmember Young mentioned, our second topic will be focused on the fiscal impact analysis, and we'll be joined by Jeff Bronow and Holly Sun later on. So without further ado, let's start with ecological health. So this particular chapter covers 11 different topics. Our presentation today, we're not going to look at each of these topics individually in the interest of time. We have grouped them together, and we're only highlighting some of the policies today in the presentation. However, you are certainly welcome to ask questions about any of the topics that you found within the chapter. Next. So also, HOCO by Design has an environmental appendix. So the intent of that particular appendix is to provide additional detail on some of the topics that are covered within the environment chapter, such as water quality in local streams, restoring the Chesapeake Bay, and hazard and flood mitigation planning. So the technical appendix gets us a little bit more into the weeds with some of those particular topics. Again, we're not going to present this level of detail today in the interest of time, but you are certainly welcome to ask questions. And a lot of this information, though, that is in this appendix is also required as a part of the state's water resources element, so that's part of the reason why we have these additional details here as well. Next. So before we get into ecological health, just wanted to remind everyone that the general plan, it is meant to be a high-level visionary long-term document that primarily addresses how we grow, where we grow, and what we preserve over the next 20 years. Next slide. And our general plan, we use it a lot like a roadmap that gives direction to multiple county agencies about a variety of topics and can inform future implementation efforts, such as the updates to our land development and zoning regulations, and can also inform future functional and master plans. And we thought it might be helpful to specifically share with you what are some implementing documents that might implement the ecological health chapter. So some of those documents that support this chapter or further the vision is the Climate Action Plan, the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan, and the Design Manual Volume 1, and that covers a lot of our stormwater management requirements. And throughout many of our work sessions, I think you've heard me say over and over again that the HOCO by Design, the plan, proposes an approach to growth and conservation. So that basically focuses on growth, being focused and targeted in our mixed-use activity centers, limited infill opportunities outside of activity centers, and also some limited opportunities in the rural west. All of that is a part of our growth strategy. But when it gets to our conservation strategy, that is basically what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to focus on how HOCO by Design really prioritizes ecological health. And this chapter really does build upon our strong land preservation record. Again, I know that many of you have heard me say this a lot. We do have 39% of our land that's permanently protected in parks, open space, and through environmental and agricultural easements. And this plan proposes to build on that preservation record. Next. So within each of our planning theme chapters, we do have a section that's entitled What We Heard that just gives you, provides some highlights from what we heard throughout the community planning process. And of course, we heard from our Howard County community that there is a great deal of value placed on the natural environment, parkland, and open space. There's also a great deal of support for mitigating and adapting to climate change, protecting farmland and natural resources, implementing the green infrastructure network. And when it comes to equity, there was certainly also a lot of support expressed for helping cost-burdened households with climate change adaptation. In this slide, we just wanted to share some notable quotes as far as what we heard from the community related to the plan's approach to growth and conservation. And of course, for more quotes or more summaries of what we heard and who we heard from, please be sure to check out our HOCO by Design engagement summary, which is available on our website. Also, as a part of the process for developing this particular chapter, we formed a strategic advisory group. If you recall, we formed 3 of those, one focused on schools, one focused on housing, and then one that focused on environment. And basically, we recognize that environment, it's a very expansive topic. So we specifically asked our strategic advisory group to hone in on 2 questions. One was, how should the county increase natural resource protection and restoration measures? And what additional climate change mitigation and adaptation measures related to natural resources should the county consider in the future? And then this slide, it just shows some highlights from the recommendations from our strategic advisory group, but many of these recommendations have been incorporated into our plan, and we're going to go through those today. So I won't spend much time on this slide, and instead I'd really like to turn it over to Susan Overstreet to really start to talk about what's in the chapter.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Good morning. So this morning we'll walk through the key topics that highlight content in the chapter, starting with support for the county's ecological health. So start with the definition of ecosystems as being comprised of all living organisms, the physical environment, and the interrelationships between them within a particular area. And ecosystems provide a variety of valuable services, including clean water, flood control, and food production. And the health of these ecosystems, their ecological health, is the foundation that supports economic and community health and personal well-being.
I'm sorry, we can just move this a little closer.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not loud enough. Okay. So HOCO by Design includes a new policy to support the county's ecological health with these related actions. Integrate the goals of protecting and restoring the county's ecological health into relevant county programs and policies. Ensure that these efforts have adequate funding and create a dedicated funding source, as was done for the county's Ag Land Preservation Program, and establish a goal for resource protection, both countywide and by major watershed. So the next topic is mitigating and adapting to climate change. And projected impacts from climate change in Howard County include changes to precipitation patterns and higher temperatures. And these changes could harm our natural environment and as well as economically distress many households, businesses, and families. So there are ways to mitigate or reduce climate change. One way is to reduce the use of fossil fuels by improving energy efficiency and increasing the use of renewable energy. Another way is to increase carbon sequestration by protecting natural resources and agricultural land. And we can also implement smart growth policies that are compatible with mitigation practices. Climate change adaptation will also be needed, and some options for that include revising building and infrastructure construction standards, revising stormwater management standards, shifting agricultural crops and reforestation and landscaping species, adjusting agricultural and forest pest management practices, and conserving and planting more trees. So the county recently completed an update to our climate action plan, and the plan establishes mitigation and adaptation goals and actions, and includes actions to build resilience, particularly for our most vulnerable communities. Green buildings are designed to be environmentally sustainable and conserve the use of resources in their design, construction, and operation. The county's green building requirements for new public and private buildings were established in 2008, but have not been updated since. So our new policy is to integrate climate change mitigation and adaptation goals into county programs and policies through the following action. Evaluate and enhance opportunities for climate change mitigation adaptation measures in the land development and zoning regulations, such as natural resource protection and the provision of renewable energy. Enhance design requirements for infrastructure and buildings to ensure resilience under future weather patterns. Review and update our green building design standards, and ensure economically vulnerable communities have the resources necessary for mitigation and adaptation measures. So our next slides covered protecting sensitive environmental resources and incentivizing natural resource protection and restoration. So as shown on this map, Howard County contains a wealth of natural resources, including forests, which are shown in green, wetlands, streams, and lakes, which are shown in blue. So new development and redevelopment have requirements to protect each of these resources, but there are a limited number of incentives for additional resource protection or restoration. So our subdivision regulations requirements include protections for stream and wetland buffers, the 100-year floodplain, and large areas of steep slopes. And if rare, threatened, and endangered species habitat is present, the applicant is referred to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for guidance. The Forest Conservation Act also works to minimize forest clearing and require mitigation for forest that is cleared. In our zoning regulations, we have 3 residential zoning districts that protect sensitive resources through the use of optional or required residential cluster development. Cluster development groups houses together to limit site disturbance so that the remaining area can be protected in open space or easement. Turning now to incentives, we have the Green Neighborhood Program, which is a voluntary point-based program for more environmentally friendly and sustainable development. Points can be earned by exceeding minimum requirements for protecting sensitive resources and by doing habitat restoration projects. The program was created in 2008, but has not been widely used. Another incentive that we have is the Density Exchange Overlay District, which allows residential density in the rural conservation and rural residential zoning districts to be exchanged between parcels. And this permanently preserves large sending parcels in environmental and agricultural easements. So our policies for resource protection and restoration include a policy to ensure regulations provide adequate protection for sensitive resources, and a policy to incentivize resource protection and restoration by considering increased use of the Density Exchange Overlay District in both the East and the West, and evaluating and strengthening the Green Neighborhood Program to increase program use and incorporate new options. Next, we'll talk about managing natural resources by watershed, managing stormwater, and expanding tree canopy and forest cover. So this map shows the county's 7 major watersheds and impervious cover, which is shown in black. And the health of water resources is directly linked to the use of land within their watersheds, so the county takes a watershed-based approach for water resource management. So watershed management planning generally includes assessing current land use and stream conditions, identifying problem areas such as a lack of stormwater management or stream channel erosion, ranking these problem areas for severity, developing preliminary designs and cost estimates for priority restoration projects, and then developing an implementation schedule. So our county's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System stormwater discharge permit requires the development and implementation of watershed management plans. So since 2010, county stormwater management regulations have required the use of environmental site design, or ESD. ESD treats runoff with vegetation and soil in multiple small treatment facilities, such as those shown in this picture. Stormwater management facilities must be inspected every 3 years, so ESD increases the resources needed to conduct inspections and to maintain the stormwater management system. Stormwater management requirements for redevelopment sites offer an opportunity to improve management in areas that were developed prior to current regulations. So climate change is projected to bring more short-duration, high-intensity storms, and ESD facilities provide water quality treatment and management for most rain events. However, for high-intensity storms, management beyond ESD is needed. So in areas vulnerable to flooding, stormwater management for these types of storms may require a combination of ESD and large holding facilities such as ponds. And this combination approach is already in place in some watersheds, such as the Tiber Branch. So to ensure adequate funding to meet the county's conditions of the county's NPDES stormwater permit, the county charges an annual watershed protection and restoration fee. The fee is based on the size of the property for residential properties or on the area of impervious cover for non-residential properties. This fee goes into the Watershed Protection and Restoration Fund, which may be used for a variety of purposes as shown here. And the fee generates about $10 million annually. So tree canopy and forest cover provide many benefits, as shown here, that help us meet our goals for climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as watershed management. So establishing goals for forest cover and forested stream buffers by watershed helps to achieve multiple objectives, although in more developed watersheds, a tree canopy goal may be more appropriate. So forests must be healthy and self-sustaining to provide these many benefits. And forest health is threatened by invasive exotic species, which can displace or kill native species. In addition, deer can overbrowse the forest understory, eating tree seedlings and saplings, which damages the ability of the forest to regenerate. And climate change may increase threats from invasives by expanding their ranges and increasing their populations. So increased forest management is needed to help address these threats. So our policies and actions for these 3 topics include a policy to evaluate and improve stormwater management requirements to enhance climate change resilience, including an action to update stormwater management design standards to address future precipitation patterns. We have a policy to expand the use of watershed management plans for resource management, including an action to ensure the Watershed Protection and Restoration Fund has adequate funding, and a policy to manage forests for long-term health, including an action to establish goals by watershed for forest cover, forested stream buffers, and tree canopy coverage. So next we'll talk about implementing our Green Infrastructure Network Plan. So this map shows Howard County's environmental resources and the Green Infrastructure Network. The network is a map system of hubs and corridors that includes and links the most ecologically significant natural areas in the county. Hubs, which are shown in red outline, generally contain large areas of forest and wetlands that provide valuable habitat, and the corridors, shown in orange outline, usually follow rivers and streams, and they link the hubs together. So based on the 2012 Green Infrastructure Network Plan, there are 51 hubs and 48 corridors. So this map shows protected land in the dune. Parkland and open space are shown in dark green, and agricultural and environmental easements are shown in bright green. And again, according to the 2012 GIN Network Plan, approximately 76% of the land in hubs is protected in parkland or open space, 11% is under an easement, and 6% is uncommitted, or is land that has development potential. In the corridors, approximately 26% of the land is in parkland or open space, 26% is under an easement, and 11% is uncommitted. So the Green Infrastructure Network Plan contains goals, objectives, and a list of implementation tools that can be used to protect and enhance the network. Implementation actions since 2012 include the items listed here, and the pictures shown here are from our wildlife monitoring within the corridors. Actions to protect land within the network include acquiring several agricultural easements that added extra protections for gin areas on the farms, and adding the network as a priority forest retention and planting area in the recently updated Forest Conservation Act. So our policy for the Green Infrastructure Network is to continue to expand implementation of our plan by integrating plan implementation into relevant county plans and programs, consider regulatory protections such as the use of an overlay zoning district to target resource protection within the network, and to establish an easement or land purchase program to protect our uncommitted parcels. So the last topic we'll highlight is preserving farmland. And this is a map of preservation easements in the county. Farmland is preserved in the county primarily through the county's agricultural land preservation program, and those parcels are shown in dark purple. Farmland is also preserved through the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, and those parcels are shown in teal, and through the zoning regulations, which allows the creation of preservation parcels that can be dedicated to the county's program, and those parcels are shown in light purple. As of June 2021, there were almost 23,000 acres under easement through these three programs. So the county's program is funded by a 25% share of the local transfer tax. A large number of final payments on previous easement purchases began coming due in 2019, and that will continue through 2024, which has been decreasing the fund balance, but the fund balance is projected to rebound in the mid to late 2020s. There are about 86 properties, or just over 3,300 acres of land potentially eligible for the program. So the program continues to acquire easements, but is also shifting more to monitoring and stewardship of easements and assisting farmers with challenges and opportunities. So given the limited amount of remaining land eligible for preservation, the county should consider repurposing a portion of the ALPP fund to expand current assistance for the agricultural community and to enhance the county's environmental efforts. If you would like to learn more about the current efforts to help the agricultural community and other proposed efforts, those will be discussed in the Economic Prosperity chapter. So any significant transition to a non-agricultural use of the fund would require legislation at the state level. The county would need to work with stakeholders to identify appropriate and effective potential uses of the fund. So our policies and actions here include a policy to continue to promote agricultural land preservation through the county and other programs, and a policy to expand the scope of potential uses for the ALPP fund by working with stakeholders while ensuring continued funding of the ALPP. So that concludes our presentation, and with that I'll hand it back to you as chair.
All right, thank you. I will go ahead and start. I have lots of questions. You know I always do. I could keep you guys busy here for the next 2 hours. But I've got Ms. Walsh participating as well. So whenever you want to ask a question or follow up on something that I've asked, just jump in. Okay, Liz? Are you there?
I will. I will. I'm like fussing with my button. I will do that. Thanks, Deb.
Okay. I will take that into account that you have a fussy button. Okay. So I'm going to start at the very beginning, and actually the way that I've had my questions laid out is sort of chapter by chapter. Although I have to say, Ms. Overstreet, one of my questions, and since it was very last on your slide, I may just jump over to it right now, because one of my questions was, how are we going to dedicate more funding to protect ecological and environmental health in Howard County? And you gave an answer. So I thought that was very interesting, that we could use some of that money that we have been using for AgPres to help the farmers who are in AgPres as well as to contemplate ways that we could help in other aspects of protecting our ecological health. Did I hear that correctly? Okay.
May I just jump in quickly?
Yes, you may, because that was I was really happy to hear that. So please jump in.
Yeah, as the Ag Preservation Program is funded with our transfer tax, so if it were to be expanded to preserve land for environmental purposes, that would likely require a state legislative change. So just want to make it clear that we still.
Well aware of that.
Great.
Because I've tried to change that transfer tax as well. And I recognize that not only would it require a state change, but it would also require the backing of the executive director, the county executive to do so, because I don't think the state delegation would make that change without the county executive's go ahead. So, yes, I know that there are hurdles.
Deb?
Yes.
Did Susan nod yes?
Susan
Your
nodded.
question.
Did you hear what Mary Kendall said?
Well, Mary's answer sounded kind of like a maybe or a no, but I got the sense that maybe Susan nodded yes, which is why I'm asking.
Susan did nod yes, and I thought, yeah, and Mary said yes, but pointed out the hurdles, which I said, I'm aware of those, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, which could be significant, but I think that that's a great idea. And I'm glad we're starting off on that note. I would love to see that happen, because I do think that we need more money to dedicate toward helping the farmers who are in our agricultural area find ways to monetize what they're trying to do to keep their land, and to deal with all kinds of environmental issues, which we've got here. So I want to go right to the introduction, where there was a mention, there were a couple things that I thought were interesting in this introduction. And the overall idea was that these were opportunities to deepen Howard County's commitment to environmental stewardship, which this chapter certainly gives many, many examples of how we could do that. And one of the first things in this chapter was a discussion about the public engagement process, where it was mentioned, among other things, that the participants emphasized the need for aggressive development regulations for forest preservation and better stormwater management. And then there was a mention of the Strategic Advisory Group for the Environment. So I went to that part of your website where you have all of the strategic advisory groups, their meetings, their minutes, their agendas, and I appreciate the fact that that's all up there on your website. And I think for people who want to dig deeper in one of these issues, that's a good place to go. I did want to dig deeper. And in the second meeting, there was a presentation where apparently the SAG group suggested that we consider limits on the area disturbance or the percentage of impermeable surface, increase stream and wetland buffer requirements, expand current zoning districts that use cluster development practices, use resource protection overlay, expand the green infrastructure network, all of which was in your presentation, I believe. Well, the increasing the buffers was not, but the other things were. Offer incentives such as density bonuses, tax credits, and housing allocations in exchange for additional restoration measures, and more funding for stormwater management to support watershed restoration. And here was my concern. Every one of these things is great, and they are most of them are, you've talked about each one of these topics more throughout this ecological health chapter. But I look at what the past has been, and what's that old saying? The past is indicative of the present, but there's something else that it's even more specific than that. And I look at the environmental bills that Ms. Walsh has put forth over the last 4 years. CB3 got tabled, would have required a certificate of approval for, among other things, the removal of trees. It died. CB38, that was legislation intended to prohibit waivers and development in the Patapsco Lower North Branch watershed and the Ellicott City floodplain. Failed. CB4 was to change the process for applying for necessary disturbances to create more transparency. And DPZ is required to report monthly the necessary disturbances being granted in the county. That was the only environmental bill that passed. CB11, a comprehensive change.
That was gutted.
Okay, I'm sorry. It was gutted and then passed.
Yes, this is a delightful presentation, Deb.
Thank you.
Those of us in C1.
Thank you.
But yeah, CB4 was gutted if we're going to go there.
And we're still going. CB11, comprehensive change to the ways in which we protect our scenic roads. It was passed, then vetoed. CB57 was tabled to extend the life of the enforcement of enhanced enforcement of forest conservation. Failed. And CB 78 would have protected more trees all over the county by expanding the diameter of trees considered specimen that had to be saved from development. It passed and then was vetoed. So everything in this chapter can be related back, or many of this can be, much of what's in here can be related back to bills that have already been filed and have failed for the most part or been vetoed. So my big question to you all is, how do we move forward on all of these issues that are laid out in this chapter here if we don't have support that we need? And I can't say that DPZ's role in this has been, I could only say that DPZ's role in this actually has been not to support all of these bills. They have actively worked against these bills. And yet all of this information is here in this chapter.
Well, I can't speak to the past bills that, didn't get passed or were vetoed. But, I mean, what I can say is I think we have to look forward. I mean, I think we're here today to present a vision for the next 20 years, as is outlined in this particular general plan. Once this general plan gets adopted, that's when we would have the opportunity to review and evaluate our existing regulations, determine how they can be improved or enhanced to better meet the vision that's outlined here in the plan. I think there's a lot of ways that in the recent past we have been able to improve our environmental resource protections, especially I think one fairly successful accomplishment has been actually through our alternative compliance process, where for these environmental regulations, if we're seeking, if a petitioner or an applicant is seeking a alternative request, seeking an alternative compliance request, they now go to, as you know, 3 different department heads to seek approval. And that has resulted in a lot of revise and resubmits. And I think that has resulted in overall better site designs for a lot of these development projects that can help preserve and protect environmental resources on site. So in terms of our role with how we can better protect environmental resources, I think that's a process we've established that is doing that. But again, looking forward to the future, I think this plan sets a vision for how we can move forward and evaluate these existing regulations that we have to enhance and build upon them. I mean, I don't know if anyone has anything else to add, but.
Follow up. So does that mean that the DPZ of the future would support initiatives like the ones that I've just gone through?
So I can't speak to why they were or weren't necessarily why they were or weren't supported, or even if they were or weren't supported. So that's really not a question I can answer.
Liz, do you have anything?
Yeah, I thought your question wasn't in the past. I thought your question was looking forward, Deb. And so that's the answer that we want. I agree with Deb. This would have been my first question had I gone first, which is these are a lot of pretty words and all kinds of concepts and ideas that I would totally agree with and have admittedly pursued unsuccessfully in the last 4.5 years. But what assurance do we have that this section of the HOCO by Design overall package is going to be pursued with the vigor that I'm sure some of the other portions are? What confidence do we have that we do have the will in DPZ? And don't forget Office of Community Sustainability, Deb, because they were right there in opposition to many of these bills as well. What assurance do we have that those agencies who are tasked with this kind of obligation and the executive, who again supports pretty words on a piece of paper, but notwithstanding alleged waiver improvements, those trees still come down yesterday. And where is the will and how do we have any assurance that that's going to change in a pretty dramatic way? I would think would need to happen in order to implement what's described as the vision in this chapter 3.
Yeah, also in Chapter 11, that's our implementation chapter. And just as we did with Plan Howard 2030, we commit to reporting on the implementation and the progress that we make associated with all of the policies and actions in this plan. So right now we're proposing that we would have a midterm, we are doing, I think, a midterm report. So within 5 years after passing the general plan, I think it's 5 years, but we would be sharing with council and the public a progress report. And then also a good number of these implementation strategies would be done through a comprehensive rezoning. So comprehensive rezoning doesn't only look at one specific chapter, it tries to take a look at all of the chapters that are giving guidance to how we change our land development and zoning regulations. So I think all of that would have to be looked at comprehensively.
Agreed, and I have many more specific questions about that as we go through this. Yes. So next is also in the introduction, a statement about vulnerable communities and the ecological hazards that they face, and certainly agree that vulnerable communities do face ecological hazards. I would probably also say environmental hazards, because I look at the ecology as being maybe more about the water and the ground and warm air versus cold air, et cetera. But I was curious, for vulnerable communities, are you talking about vulnerable to the elements or vulnerable from the perspective of income? And we have a vulnerability map that was referred to in our last session, which I actually have printed out. And the vulnerability map is only refers to income. And there are two major areas of Howard County that are colored dark purple as the most vulnerable areas of the county. And the reason why I mention this is because in looking at those two communities, what they are most vulnerable to, and is not mentioned in this chapter, is airplane noise and airplane pollution. Because we have constant planes flying over our heads 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they go over those two darkest purple areas of the vulnerability map. So that is pollution. And that is a major source of pollution over low income as well as not low income areas of this county. So I'm just wondering how you define that word vulnerability, how you've looked at it.
I think Ms. Bell and I are going to do a little handoff here. So in terms of vulnerability, I think it really depends. So for example, specifically, sometimes we speak to socioeconomic vulnerability. and we would have to develop maps to identify where those socioeconomically vulnerable communities are identified. So it really, where we're looking for these quote-unquote vulnerable communities, it really depends on what the intent or purpose is. What are we trying to protect these vulnerable communities from? So we certainly do have guidance in here and policies for providing additional support to socioeconomically vulnerable communities as it pertains to climate adaptation mitigation. There's also a separate effort, which I don't know if Susan or Mark Richmond want to speak to, as it pertains to flood vulnerability. So those would be separate factors, separate criteria that would have to be evaluated to identify specifically where those communities are. And then I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Ms. Bella.
Yeah, so your initial question, essentially I wanted to say is yes and, because as Mary said, it depends on the criteria we're looking at. So there's place-based vulnerabilities, flooding, steep slopes, proximity to hazards or pollution, generating land uses, and those are more fixed because they're associated with the land. But obviously, we're also looking and having to constantly evaluate our population, socioeconomic demographics, because it changes. So we don't take the general plan, say this is a 20-year plan, and say our vulnerable community is always going to be right here, just because it is. Because people will move and shift, and where a community is vulnerable and what they're vulnerable to is going to shift over the next 20 years. So it has to be a dynamic view. So the general plan provides us the guidance of saying we should continue to monitor the locations that are vulnerable to certain hazards and the communities that might be not as well equipped to adapt to shocks, which is really what we're focusing on. And so that's why income plays such a big factor, because if you don't have a large reserve of income to personally respond to shocks to the system, then you're not going to be able to adapt as well. And so you might need additional assistance from society at large. So those are kind of the focus we're looking at when we're evaluating what is a vulnerable community, how it will shift, and what's impacting them, if that answers your question.
I just would hope that maybe at some point we address the airplane pollution and noise, the particulate matter that rains down on us in our communities all the time.
I think, do you want to?
And I don't know, Liz, if you wanted to ask anything about vulnerable communities in terms of floods.
I mean, we know where they are. It's where, Department of Public Works or police will close off roads in anticipation of the water rising. But again, I don't, at least historically, see a change in policy in terms of what we do upstream of those locations. I actually, even going to the airplane noise, this is again in Elkridge, a Route 1 issue. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the maps that are included in this section, I know I say it every meeting, but it's because this area of our county is always perennially, it has been neglected. The tree canopy, map 3-4 shows only one location that's, the worst off in yellow, and that's Laurel, Savage. It's not in Columbia. The maps showing the potential heat islands, that's Route 1. What specifically is being recommended in the Route 1 corridor different than other parts of the county due to the fact that it doesn't have those preservation easements and it does have all the ill effects of heat islands and no reserves to deal with shocks? How are we dealing with that on a big picture conceptual term in this document?
Well, you have a Route 1 corridor plan, right? And what in that Route 1 corridor plan might indicate some extra protections or some enhancements or some restorations that could occur in that area to address the issues that Liz has just brought up?
Right. So I can tell you big picture, right? So what that map is all about is trying to identify the fact that we have certain areas with high impervious cover and low tree canopy. And those are places that, broadly speaking, we've identified as these are places where we need to try to mitigate any potential heat island impacts that could come forth in the future. So this, broadly speaking, this plan does say that we need to recognize that we need to establish and set, potentially tree canopy goals and forest cover goals, recognizing tree canopy is more appropriate in highly developed watersheds. So generally speaking, that is something that would have probably likely an impact specific to Route 1, as this plan recognizes that there is high impervious cover and low tree canopy in that area. When we get to the Route 1 plan, when we start to speak to that in September, I think we can speak more specifically to if there are any additional environmental measures within that. But generally speaking, I think we would be turning to the broader ecological health chapter as it pertains to areas that, again, have high impervious cover and low tree canopy.
Right, and I think, we do have a specific action that's to prioritize economically vulnerable communities for native tree plantings to mitigate heat island impacts. So we do speak directly.
Which is great. Although apparently, and again, I remembered, the past is the prelude to the future. I mean, the past was just put those apartment buildings in there. And when the most recent ZRA involving the commercial activity corridor was passed, my desire to say, if you're going to take commercial out, we need to put a commercial requirement for these buildings on the first floor, that they need to enhance their buildings with parks. And that was amended out. So I haven't been down Route 1 to with that fine-tooth comb to see where, is there even an area to put trees anymore? I mean, I wonder if we're past that point, and what do we do now?
Well, Route 1 has a long history of impervious cover, right? Because it was used for
industrial and commercial. That's correct.
Right, for a long, long time.
Right. But then we got rid of all that, and we put in all this residential,
right,
and so now there's all these apartment buildings. But then there was the opportunity, when all that was happening, to create some sort of tree cover.
We didn't get rid of all the industrial. There's still a strong industrial sector there. But specific to the Route 1 plan, I think where we see opportunities to incorporate more green space is within those places we've identified for mixed-use activity centers. So that's where you might find more opportunities for green space in those targeted nodes.
Okay, did you have any follow-ups, Liz?
No, I mean, that's what I'm worried about, is those are 3 nodes along the 11 miles of Route 1, maybe not even coinciding with the danger areas that's depicted on this series of maps in this chapter. I haven't dug into the Route 1 plan, but I certainly in a cursory reading did not see anything that looked like it was suggesting a tree canopy goal for that area, or even the watershed map. I love that that's how this section was approached. But again, it's only this section that talks in terms of watersheds. Route 1, 1, 2, 3 different watersheds, according to map 3.2. I will say that this chapter is the least upsetting to me because it says all the things that we want it to say. But as the graphics are put forward, to me, it shows a glaring omission decade after decade in the general plan or implementation thereof in that particular quarter. But I don't see any response to that that's really, actionable. And so that's my concern.
Well, again, if you look at the Route 1 chapter, does talk about the importance of increasing the native tree canopy throughout the county, and specifically in the Route 1 chapter, we do recognize that there should be opportunities within Route 1 to do that as well.
So I would just follow up with putting a huge, huge asterisk. And actually, I already have it in my book, so I guess I already did that. On page 7, where the first thing under implementing actions is integrating the goals of protecting and restoring the county's ecological health when updating policies and programs and policies. And I would add, I guess, regulations to that sentence, because the comprehensive rezoning is coming up. And I would hope that in the zoning regulations that you are handing us at some point in the future, that all of these goals are somehow reflected in these future regulations, policies, and programs. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next part, which was dedicated funding, but we already talked about that and the need for dedicated funding to deal with a lot of these issues. Did you want to add anything to that, Liz, about, do you have any
Yeah.
other? Okay.
Yes, please. I thought even in the presentation there were some inconsistencies, and maybe I'm confusing that with parts of the Chapter 3 narrative. But again, those last slides that Susan concluded with, totally agree. And, you know, for years we've been talking to Amy Gowan at DPZ about 2 potential changes to use of that transfer tax set aside for agricultural preservation, which is making it less onerous for agricultural lands in the east to qualify, because there are certainly opportunities to grow food and feed people on smaller plots closer to where people are. Or alternatively, I think what's suggested in one of these sections that we use it for purchasing or preserving land that isn't dedicated to agricultural purpose. I thought I saw that somewhere in here, but then in elsewhere I saw, well, now that we can't buy any more agricultural land, we'll revert that 25% of the transfer tax to some kind of enhancement of agricultural promoting services or resources. Did I read that wrong, or is there still we could do several things with transfer tax that maybe not going to be used in full just by putting agricultural land on the west side of the PSA into preservation?
So the ecological health chapters is proposing that we take a look at how we can use the transfer tax, one, to continue to support the preservation of properties in the West that have not yet been preserved that are eligible for the program, and also to look at how we could expand it to create opportunities to preserve land for with significant environmental resources. In the economic prosperity chapter, we talk about how we can create more opportunities to expand agriculture both in the East and the West. And then within that chapter, there is discussion and a recognition that for the existing farmers that we have, we do need to, of course, continue to support them so that they can all continue to be successful farmers, especially as our climate continues to evolve and change and makes more challenges for farming.
Okay, so those 3 potential uses of that transfer tax are still there. It's somewhere in the analysis as part of this HOCO by design effort.
I think we're primarily suggesting the transfer tax, right, be used for expanded agricultural opportunities as a whole, for ag land preservation, and then also for environmental preservation purposes.
Okay. All right, thanks, Deb.
Okay. So you mentioned, as you keep reminding us, and I think it is somewhat a source of frustration, but we do have to accept it, that this is a general plan, all right? And so you're not giving us sort of some of the specifics that I think maybe some of us are frustrated about wanting to find in a general plan. But I am wondering, because one of the things that is also mentioned in here under this chapter, Ecological Health, is integrating the goals of protecting and restoring the county's ecological health when updating policies. And I'm wondering, well, I just mentioned why I think that it needs to include regulations, but I'm wondering if you all have started thinking about regulations. If, as you're writing these words in this general plan, I'm starting to think about regulations. I would assume that DPZ would, and I'm not going to ask you specifically what regulations you're thinking about, because that would be unfair at this point in time. But I'm just wondering if, as you are writing these words, and I certainly would agree with Liz that these are really nice words throughout this chapter, that are you thinking, oh, well, we would need to do X in order to really pursue this goal fully? Do you wake up at night contemplating this like I do? Oh, if we really were going to do this, this is what we should be doing with this zoning regulation.
Yeah. Sometimes, yes. But
Okay, good. I'm glad that I'm not the only one waking up at night thinking about this.
yeah, specifically, I think about Ag Pres, and I come in the morning and I walk by Joy's desk and I say, guess what I thought about last night?
Okay,
But
all
anyway,
right.
Specifically, though, in this plan, perhaps when we get into the chapter, or the topic that's entitled Protecting Sensitive Environmental Resources, we do specifically contemplate ways that should be explored for modifying our zoning regulations. So that is specifically in policy number 3.
Well, go ahead
but-
and talk about that.
Yeah, but you mentioned them actually in the very beginning. You did a lovely job articulating basically what it is that this plan is contemplating. So, for example, some of the ways we might be able to explore enhancing or updating our zoning regulations to enhance natural resource protection is through expanding opportunities for cluster subdivision, currently generally only used in 3 different zoning districts, establishing overlay zoning districts to protect sensitive environmental resources, such as perhaps the green infrastructure network, but then, as you mentioned, incentivizing resource protection through our zoning regulations with density exchange options, tax credits, density bonuses, and housing allocations.
Actually, those weren't any of the things I was thinking of. But I appreciate the fact that you mentioned those, because I was thinking expanding stream buffers. I was thinking about all the things that failed. Let's see. That included, a certificate of approval for removal of trees so that we would have fewer trees removed. The bill that would have changed, expanded the diameter of trees considered specimen, enhancing the enforcement of forest con, we did actually, after the first scenic roads bill was vetoed, we did get another one passed, now that I'm remembering that. They're prohibiting, waivers and development in the Patapsco Lower and North Branch watershed. Yeah, those were, the things that you just mentioned are definitely more development oriented. And the things I just mentioned, I think, were more specifically environment. And I know there's a middle ground. And I hope that we can find that when we go through comprehensive rezoning, that cluster development in order to preserve green space. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that they're going to have more grass around them? Are they actually going to get a park? We tried to get a park on Route 1, and that failed. I don't know where we go with some of this.
So some of those concerns, maybe wouldn't be necessarily addressed in our general plan. So remember, it gives direction to other implementing documents.
I understand that.
What you
I do understand
right,
that.
The land preservation, parks and recreation plan. So they all have to work in tandem. And we are certainly recognizing that, ensuring that there's good access to parks and green space for everyone in the county is absolutely very important. And that's the general guidance established here. So some of these issues would be addressed through other implementing documents.
But we're going to get to preserving trees, so.
Deb, if I may too, I think it's also a matter of where people interact with subdivision regulations and where they interact. So when you say these are development focused, it's because essentially what activity is someone doing with their property that triggers these environmental regulations to come into play. And that's typically when you're having a development, because you're actually looking at your site as a whole and you're doing something pretty expansive with it, that you're going to trigger the oversight and the regulations coming into play, versus someone who has a property who's just making tweaks to it that don't trigger any kind of subdivision regulation or comp for zoning issue, because they're not reimagining the site of the whole, but they can do these little tweaks to their project, to their property, that are helpful, like planting a few trees, putting in a stormwater management facility. And those kind of projects are incentivized through different programs that aren't necessarily touched when you get to development regulations, if that makes sense. So I think it's kind of, I think what you're mentioning a lot in the regulations, we're touching a little bit more of that ongoing maintenance of people's property or what they do with it.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bella. I could just jump on that. So there is also a topic that talks about encouraging environmental stewardship. So a good number of these environmental stewardship programs might be managed by a department that isn't ours, such as the Office of Community Sustainability. And we recognize that a good bit of the county is currently under private ownership. So how do we incentivize them to be better stewards of their own properties and the resources on them? So there certainly is guidance to and continue to educate and offer programs to support property owners through these efforts.
Totally agree. Also wonderful words, and I hope that we do more of that. I mean, one of the things right now, and this was one of the questions I was going to ask later, but I'll talk about it right now, is our water stewardship program with our students, our school students, and they seem to be the ones who are most often actually measuring our water quality, or at least they're the ones who are publishing our water quality results. And we didn't do great. In 2023, our stream grade was a B. And if you look at the map of where the areas that did the worst versus the ones that did better, you would see that the stream areas in the more intensely developed areas had the worst water quality, which I guess is not surprising, but I mean, we keep saying that's where we want to increase. It wasn't in here. We found that on our own. I'm sorry if you're looking for it. It's called Student Scientists in Action, 2023 Howard County Watershed Report Card. And it was from the Howard County Conservancy. You remember they started a program for an environmental program for students in Howard County, and they also have a group of students who are like their conservation scientists, and they do this watershed program every year and go out and measure the quality of water around the county. They also look at schoolyards to see what the soil is like there. And I mention this because we're talking about stewardship, and I think if there's anybody that you can get involved in stewardship, it would be young people who are looking at these streams. But I also think that some of the things that they found are alarming, and I actually think are worth looking at as we are contemplating where to put more density and cluster more development.
So I think you had mentioned essentially in our older parts of the county or where we have some of the most degradation of our streams. And a lot of that is because of the redevelopment practices over the last 100 years. And so one of the goals for looking at our regulations and updating those is that when those sites get reinvested in, or when they redevelop, or when anyone triggers one of those regulations, we can go back in and use modern solutions that can help improve those systems overall. Because unfortunately, we're not starting with the blank slate where we can just create from nothing. And so that's one of the reasons we have to address those redeveloped sites in the areas that are already built up. And you have to do it through enhancing the regulations, and then also protecting what already exists in a good state of affairs. And that's why we do have the Green Infrastructure Network and the hubs that we want to continue to protect, while then we go back and improve areas that have been redeveloped to a standard we would never, developed to a standard we would not have permitted currently.
And I believe part of trying to enhance and improve our stream quality, part of that is the reason why we're recommending the use of watershed management plans to provide a comprehensive framework for protecting and restoring natural resources. I don't know if you want to add anything about watershed management plans, but.
Yeah, I think that's also, I mean, the county does have an ongoing watershed management plan program through the NPDS Stormwater, where they've developed watershed management plans for every major watershed in the county to look at restoration projects. And that's, doing stormwater retrofits and looking at areas of existing impervious surface that aren't treated to current standards and going back and adding treatment.
Well, I was going to wait until later, but I think that that's a good segue into stream restoration, and what stream restoration has actually meant to our forests in Howard County. Just this past year, there were a total, and this is from your own report, there was a total of 16.15 acres cleared of forest in Howard County, and stream restoration conducted by the county was responsible for half of that cleared forest. And that's a lot. I mean, it's not a lot of acres, but it's a big percentage of what we're losing in Howard County if what we are doing through stream restoration is clearing out forests. And that's, I think, a bigger issue, but one that is touched upon in this chapter. I think at this point, most people know that stream restoration, the way we've been doing it, is controversial. And taking down specimen trees in order to do stream restoration, it just seems like it's not doing the environment an overall favor. And I know we have to comply with the permits, and that this is a way of doing, an acceptable way of doing it. And it puts local jurisdictions in a bind, because if we don't do something, then we aren't complying with the permits. The requirements of the state, the state has put upon the county to deal with the soil, to deal with the water quality. But I do think that we need to be finding more precise ways, at the very least, to do stream restoration, if not better ways overall to do mitigation.
Yeah. So my understanding of our stream restoration projects is that they do follow best practices that have been established by the state and federal government. And of course, you do need to clear trees to access the stream, but then there's replanting requirements associated with that. And when you clear trees, you might be clearing invasive trees, invasive species, and then you can replant with native species. So while there is a temporary removal of those trees, they are replanted with native species.
You might be taking out invasive trees, or you might be taking out non-invasive trees. I mean, there's nobody out there marking, oh, here's an invasive, this is a non-invasive. I mean, it's just a clear, in order for the bulldozer to get through the forest, they just clear. They are not looking at preserving certain trees. And they do get replanted. You're looking for Mark. And they do get replanted. And, my feeling, I think somebody last night said it was a pretty stick that is, doesn't take much time before the deer come along and just chomp it down. You can already see it on 108. Somebody was talking about that last night. The state planted pretty little sticks along 108 for their highway project. And a number of the trees are already dead or gone. So, but Mark, I'll let you have your say. You deserve it.
Okay. There's a lot in there to answer. I guess maybe to start with the process that we follow when we do a stream project. 99% of the projects are brought to us by residents who live near the streams, or we've gone out and found streams that are in bad shape, eroding, 6, 8, 10-foot high vertical slopes, trees falling in. So we don't go out looking for areas that don't need a project. So all the areas where we do a project, there is a need. One of the first things we do is a tree survey where we mark both the health, the size, and the species of tree. And I think it's pretty much 12 inches or larger. So if you've got the smaller trees, we don't catalog every single one of those. And then our design is done to avoid what we can to the greatest extent possible. If there's a difference between a specimen tree and 3 smaller trees, we may try to, if all the conditions are the same, we may take out 3 trees to leave the 1 specimen. Or if the specimen tree is in bad shape, or it's right on the bank and there's no way to physically do the project without taking it down, then we may take it down. So a lot goes into it. We do not clear-cut sites and then figure out what to do with the stream. What to do with the stream is a function of what the site looks like. The trees, the other vegetation, proximity to utilities and other infrastructure, proximity to people's homes. A lot of it goes into it. It's not just bulldozing the trees and seeing what happens next.
Liz?
I mean, I don't want to argue the policy basis for whether these stream restorations are legitimate. Even within the county, and Mark's walked it with me, with Mark DeLuca, there are some stream restoration projects that do exactly what Mr. Richmond described. I'm thinking of the one on Park Drive, ending at Patapsco State Park. But there are others that just clear the whole, disturb the whole site. I mean, we did it for the 2 so-called Safe and Sound projects in Ellicott City. We did it on the slope that's right off Courthouse Drive. And there are all those pretty sticks there. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been very clear for years. This is not the way to proceed with limited funds to dedicate to environmental restoration. There are alternates. They may be more costly, but in the long run, they are much better for us in the environment. And I mean, I just refer us. I mean, here are the pretty words that we say in our own HOCO by Design draft. It is generally far more cost effective to protect a healthy ecosystem than to try and restore one. Totally agree with those words. But,
Me too.
Arbitrarily starting on some length of stream and not addressing the problems at the top of the watershed and all the unprotected point sources going into it, all the way down before and after, I think is just throwing money into a fire pit. That's again, I don't mean to argue it, but there are certainly different opinions on the subject of this. I think for whatever reason, we have been lured into what looks to be an easy way to get our credits with state and federal, however we're satisfying them, by proceeding with these projects. And to say that they're brought to us, Mark, I do have some disagreement with that. A singular teacher at Dunlogan versus an entire community surrounding it, or the Columbia Association versus everyone who lives there. Like, who is bringing it to you does not automatically give it some legitimacy. There should be some real criteria. There should be some real uniformity in what we do and do not allow. And it should be a limited measure only when other opportunities don't exist to correct the same problem.
I'm looking at Mark to see if he wants to respond. But you
I think we just agree to
you
disagree.
did. I think you did too. Yeah. But that does bring up another issue, and this is where I think we would all agree, and that is, well, maybe not, but going back to the dedicated funding from the transfer tax, that could also be a source to deal with stormwater management at its beginnings, as opposed to in the streams, and helping incentivize particularly commercial entities who don't have adequate stormwater management on their parking lots or in other areas to incorporate that as a retrofit, because that's expensive. I know that from what the information is that you've shared with me. And to actually tax them as much as we would need to tax them to get them to give us the money that we would need to do it ourselves would be probably, to a certain extent, out of the question. But to be able to assist them, if maybe there was a project and we could help them with 50% of that project through this dedicated funding, that might be another way to approach this. And maybe there would be something that we could, I think it does say here in the general plan to look at sources, addressing sources of stormwater runoff. And maybe there's a place also in this chapter to say incentivizing the commercial entities who need to do retrofitting to really help us. Mark?
I'm all for putting more money towards
Okay.
stormwater management, but
Okay, I thought you would say
it's
that.
above my pay grade to make the decision of where the transfer tax goes.
Okay, but would that assist in, do you think that would assist in incentivizing our commercial entities in retrofitting in order to deal with stormwater runoff?
I think we have to, if I could just,
Please.
jump in. I don't want to, I think we need to expand all of the opportunities that are out there, explore all the opportunities that are out there to seek funding for stormwater management projects. And in the plan under policy number 6, it's not only ensuring that our NPDES stormwater, not only ensuring that our, watershed protection and restoration fund has the funding that's needed. We also look at ways how we can seek opportunities to partner with our federal and state partners as well, to seek, are there ways that they can help create some cost share opportunities? I mean, this is also a challenge for neighboring jurisdictions. How do we partner with our neighboring jurisdictions? It's a big regional challenge.
It is always good to seek money outside of the county. So, Ms. Kendall, yes, absolutely. That's another good idea. Yes. Liz, did you have anything else you wanted to say on this topic?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Because I think I have a similar question, which is we've heard in the prior work sessions that only 3% of the county is available for new development. And so to me, that means that most of the development to occur in the next 10 or 20 years is largely going to be redevelopment. And one of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation recommendations in lieu of stream restoration is to eliminate impervious surface. And so I think the way that we do that is as part of the redevelopment of properties. How does this section, this chapter 3, address what will largely be where we see the development, which is redevelopment, and how we address bringing those sites in? I guess it's Deb, you're looking for incentives for people who are just doing what they're doing and keeping it the same way, but building onto stormwater management, right? I'm asking about redevelopment and how we achieve some of the goals stated in this chapter as that occurs.
Yes, Ms. Walsh. So the general plan provides the guidance of saying, look at all the policies that are provided not only in ecological health, but all the other chapters, and comprehensively address how we're going to achieve all of them. For redeveloping sites, we're going to have to look at not only our stormwater management regulations, but all of our general site planning regulations that kind of dictate what is the amount of open space that we're having? What is the amount of tree canopy and landscaping that we're going to require on the site? How are we going to address parking? Because a lot of the issue with past redevelopment is that we had very large surface parking lots, which generate a lot of stormwater issues, don't provide space for that open space, and create heat island problems. We dedicate a lot of land to parking cars. And when we look at redeveloping, especially under the proposed redevelopment strategies we have, we're really looking at how do we better use that land to achieve not only our housing and our economic needs, but also our environmental and our ecological health needs. So it is a very broad answer, because the next step is to go into the regs and say, how does each one of these regulations achieve each one of the goals that we've outlined in this? And I'll have to defer. Mary might be quicker at actually naming the exact policy and action that does what I've just described. But I can start looking if you don't have to.
Sure. No, it's right in front of me. You're right. Yeah. So we do have a policy statement and an action in the ecological health chapter. So policy statement 5, evaluate and improve stormwater management requirements to enhance climate change resilience. And specifically, we'd be evaluating opportunities to further reduce stormwater runoff and pollutant loadings when redevelopment occurs. So that absolutely is something that is a part of this plan that needs to be looked at as our future. As you said, Councilmember Walsh is one of mostly redevelopment.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ms. Kendall. So what page in the council draft is that, policy 5?
It's EH 24.
EH 24. Do you have EH 24 in your book? Mine's end is at EH 13.
No, there's 47 pages
58, 50.
or
58.
more than that. I don't know. Is it 58? Okay, yeah, 58. There's 58 pages.
So
There's a lot of pretty pictures in between, so it's not like,
I don't know. But so I'm just trying to find my place, because that's the second time you guys have mentioned a policy, and where, I see the EH, like, how is EH 24 policy statement 5? But also on what page of the council draft is that policy 5? Because I'm wondering if I'm missing something, because I didn't see it. And as I flipped through, I looked at EH 5 and that's not it.
so if you go under, it's managing stormwater, Liz. There's a subheading called managing stormwater.
What's the page? Just give me the page.
Okay,
What's the
well,
page?
if you don't have it, it's A22 that it starts on. Or 4, I'm
Page
sorry.
22.
Yeah, 22. Right, it is a PDF page. That is correct. You may be looking at something else.
Are you looking at the electronic PDF version, or are you looking at a paper copy?
I'm looking at a paper copy, I think, of the electronic. But so my pages are like EH dash page. So now I'm on EH dash 22, and I see managing stormwater. But
Okay, go to the next page then, and you'll see there's a subtitle, a smaller subtitle called redevelopment. That's what Mary was just reading from.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
You got
Thank
it?
you.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Now, I only have 2 things to say about that. 1, we can talk about not having parking, and I know if Christiana Rigby was here, I'll make her argument for her, okay? We should have less parking to force people to be on their electronic bikes and every other method of transportation that we could possibly use here in Howard County. That's not the argument I'm making. I am actually making the argument of this is the world we live in Howard County. 97% of the people have access to cars and drive them every day, whether we like it or not. That's the world we live in. And if you go to any of the places that don't have enough parking, and that would be every over 55 community that has ever been built in Howard County, where they have to park on a street outside of the over 55 community because there's not enough parking inside the over 55 community, you will see that limiting parking does not limit the number of cars because we live in a suburban environment. And we are never going to live in a city. There might be some people who maybe live in downtown Columbia and can walk to the Tenable building, but other than that, we don't live in a city. I bet every single one of us drove to get here today. I know I did. I'm not going to question everyone to see whether or not you did, but that is how we transport ourselves. So limiting parking in these redevelopments, my suggestion would be we need to require by code permeable pavement. That's where I would go with this.
So I'm just going to, I didn't say limit parking. I said redesign it. So the type of parking that we have designed in our past development is a very suburban model of large expanses of surface parking. And so with the redevelopment, you can accommodate the parking needs to address the fact that most people do drive and likely will continue to drive in structured parking that looks different than how we have designed it and is better designed for both the type of development, the built environment we're going to try to create, as well as our environmental needs for retrofitting those sites.
Great.
And then for permeable pavers, I worked on designs that were about taking surface parking lots and trying to incorporate stormwater management and ecological health. And permeable pavers are very attractive. They are kind of one of the sexy design elements. They're very expensive, and they don't do as much to treat as the not as expensive and not as desirable water quality treatment facilities that you put. So grading the site to collect the water and towards a collection facility and a treatment facility does more that we're trying to achieve for our goal, doesn't cost as much. Permeable pavers require a lot of maintenance, and they're not necessarily the best solution, but I think they're one of the more feel-good solutions, so they're one of the ones that gets a lot of public support.
However we can get it done.
Yes. So those are kind of...
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
But I think that I hope that in the future, these are things in our redevelopment arena that will make into zoning regulations.
Yeah, and I drove pretty deep in the details, and that's really past the general plan. But the general plan provides us
I like the
policies and
details.
guidances.
That's important.
And what's in this chapter right now provides all that guidance that we need, that when we get into the regulations, when we get into the redevelopment, and then apply those to actual development sites, we'll have the tools we need to actually improve and implement what we're trying to achieve with the goals.
That would be great. Okay. I do have a question here because I think this is interesting, green neighborhoods. And Susan went into a lot more about the green infrastructure than actually I think was in the overview. So that was good. But I'm wondering, what are the two green neighborhoods that we have in Howard County? And what are the green neighborhoods that are under construction right now?
We have two that are Locust Chapel, which is built already, and then we have Oxford Square, which is almost completely built. So that's the one that's still under construction.
Locust Chapel. Mm-hmm. And where is that located?
That's in kind of in the Elkridge area.
And the other one is
Oxford Square, which is a TOD off of Coca-Cola Drive.
And did Oxford Square become a green neighborhood because it's in a TOD?
No.
Or did it do anything else to be a green neighborhood?
They met the Green Neighborhood Program requirements, so they scored points in a variety of different ways. TOD was part of how they scored points, but they did other things to score points, like a habitat management plan, habitat restoration, additional stormwater management, that kind of thing.
And Locust Chapel, Are they a TOD too?
No, they're a single-family residential development.
Liz, are you familiar with either one of, well, we're all familiar with Oxford Square, but are you familiar with Locust Chapel?
No, actually. I would ask a broader question, and maybe that's your follow-up, is why would we do this? I mean, I think it's been in place since 2008. I think my predecessor maybe changed it, perhaps for the benefit of Oxford Square. But I don't see any utility or a meaningful utility in it. Oxford Square, I would hardly describe as a green neighborhood. I'm surprised that was one of the two answers.
So the question was, are we really going to continue this if so few people use it? And if we were going to continue it, I guess the question would be, would we, it sounds like we should make it maybe a little tougher to get, but if we make it tougher to get, then there'll be one in the future. I don't know. Is this a useful designation? And what do you get? You get extra units, right?
No.
No?
Right now, so the Green Neighborhoods Program, it incentivizes developers to develop their way not only in a way that could protect environmental resources on site, but also can build the actual structures, the housing units, in a more kind of green, environmentally sustainable way. So they can score points through their site design, but also through the construction of the units themselves. So this could be a way for us to meet more of the green building standards, for example. And basically, it's generally, in the past, it was access, from my understanding, because we were out of housing allocations, right? There were limited number of housing allocations within the areas where these green neighborhoods were built. So as an incentive, they got housing allocations to build in this very kind of green, environmentally sustainable and friendly way.
Oh, so they might not have gotten the allocations in that area because the allocations didn't exist? So that was how it worked?
Right. Housing allocations were the incentive. So
Okay.
if you were in an area where you wanted to build and you didn't have housing allocations available, there was a pot set aside just for green neighborhoods that could be used to build.
Okay.
But specifically, if I can just speak to one of the outcomes, and Susan knows them best, but for example, one of the outcomes that came out of Oxford Square was a habitat management plan for the wetlands that border Oxford Square. And we do, sorry, I've been on a site visit with the team to go out and inspect the plantings on site. So as a part of these green neighborhoods, the development, they have longer term, they could have a longer term habitat management plan, for example. So again, it's just a way to further enhance our protections of environmental resources.
And for example, Locust Chapel scored points by protecting more forest conservation than they were required to by the Forest Conservation Act. So they went beyond some of our environmental protection requirements. They have extended stream buffers. Oxford Square also does the same. And then there are site design requirements, like if there are not requirements, but options, such as if they're close to mass transit, solar access available, and then there's a whole different point scoring system for the structures themselves.
I mean, I think about all this, and, I'm super concerned that we've got an apartment building right now that's going to be built in a wetland. And they're seeking a waiver. I don't know where we go with this in the future. What do we say? No, you can't build in a wetland. No, you can't build right next to forest conservation, knowing that you're going to end up, what happens when you're in a forest? Part of it is forest conservation. Part of it isn't forest conservation. So you can tear down all the forest that's next to the forest that's supposed to be conserved, and that's where the wetland is. And then you build there, an apartment building, at a headwater. I don't know where we go with all this. I see this is happening right now. And it's very concerning to me.
Well, just, I mean, generally speaking, I'm not going to speak to any of the specifics necessarily, but generally speaking, sometimes going through, again, these processes, having these green neighborhood incentives, having an opportunity for alternative compliance to better meet the intent of regulations. I mean, I think we have opportunities to, I think, be more sensitive to our environmental resources if we can kind of move forward with this guidance that's put forth in the plan. Sometimes what we can do through an alternative compliance process is if there's a removal forest request to remove a tree, then in response, well, you have to replant 2 trees, and then there's a long-term maintenance plan associated with that. So I'm just trying to say sometimes there's opportunities to better protect some environmental resources when we go through some of these processes.
And I understand that, but,
Wait, no, please let me.
okay.
2 pencil sticks are not an appropriate trade-off for 1 giant tree. Like, that is not debatable. It's not debatable, and the fact that DPZ still thinks that is a real problem for me. That is not an opportunity, that is loss. That is irreplaceable loss over generations. And I know, just know.
That is a problem. So what? I mean, it's just a problem. And we have, really, we looked at the forest map, and it's more tree canopy than it is forest. But that's not because of what's happened in the last 40 years. That's what probably happened in Howard County for the first 200 years, because all the land was cleared by farmers. So a lot of what we've got now probably has been planted over the last 100 years to make it a more desirable place to live. But then we do maybe create and enhance some of these forests, and then we turn around and we say to the people who want to take it down, go ahead and put up a stick. And then the county contributes. The most forest we lost, according to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, when we were talking about the Forest Conservation Act, the most forest Howard County lost in one fell swoop was Blandair. When we put AstroTurf all over that forested area, we lost the biggest amount of forest we've ever lost in the last, I think it was like 20 years. It's huge. And we need to be leaders. Our county needs to be leaders. If we're going to be putting this plan into place, we need to say, we can't do this. I mean, people complain all the time about there's no shade out at Blandair. We just went in and clear cut. And that's not being a leader. I know you weren't here, Mary. I know. I'm looking at you only because you're the one who's facing me. Yes, right. I know you weren't here. Yeah. And I know you weren't here either, Jessica. And Mark, you're in charge of stormwater. But that was a big deal. And somewhere along the line, we need to make sure that we are preserving what forest we have and that the county is doing it for them, that we are also adhering to those rules and thinking about how we keep forests alive. Okay. Conduct flooding vulnerability assessments. This is under stormwater management. And I'm wondering if we have done that in any place other than Ellicott City.
We have a new capital project, or 2-year-old new capital project, to look at flooding vulnerable communities, subwatersheds, and looking at the vulnerability to flooding and drainage issues relative also to underserved communities. We're the whole environmental justice group of folks and maps. So we're looking at all of that as a single effort. We are working with the Corps of Engineers to do a planning study, and right now to look at the county, or to look at these watersheds countywide, not just a little bit here, a little bit there, and to prioritize based on a number of factors. And they do planning studies all the time. They've done this before, and it's we're down to signing the agreement basically to get them started. So that's what that study is, to look at countywide, prioritize. It may, in some cases, it may be communities, not so much watersheds, but just looking at the more macro or micro level areas, and coming up with with whatever improvements we think are viable, and looking at the improvements both on public and private property, knowing that if it's a private property where the project would be best done, if we don't get the easements, then it's probably not going to happen. A lot of these areas, a lot of the problems are on private property, or the manifestations of the problem are on private property. But that study is, hopefully going to start in, very soon.
And then are we going to have a map as a result of this? Is that what are you going to have a list, or how's it? And does it include, like, if a road floods on a regular basis and there's like no water around it, but it just happens to always flood in this one area?
Yeah, I would envision maps, tables, charts, text, just a comprehensive report that shows the areas in a variety of different ways. And we are looking at, historic drainage complaints, frequently flooded roads that we know about and that we find out about from highways and emergency management, areas that have more impervious and less stormwater features there, neighborhoods that were built before stormwater was required. It's looking at everything comprehensively. And then, again, we will prioritize the various areas and watersheds and start looking at a more detailed study within that area, which will include reaching out to the public and finding out what they think the problems are, and it may be stuff that we don't know about yet. So it's a process, and we're starting the process.
When Jim Irvin was here, he helped me with a road that constantly flooded, that didn't flood because of a water feature nearby, but it was just one of those situations, and it required DPW to come in and do some stormwater mitigation there. I don't know if Hyla Brook, does that ring a bell?
It rings a bell, yes.
Okay.
I've been here long enough to remember
To
that.
remember that one, yes. Liz, did you have any questions about this?
Nope.
Okay.
Did I say no? Nope.
You
Nope.
did say no, yes. But I do think that, so you're already started on that, so that's good. So, Mary, look, he's already started on that one.
We'll
that's
note it-
good.
We'll note it for our 5-year progress
Will you
report.
note it? Yeah, will you note that for your 5-year progress? Okay. And then update stormwater management design standards for future weather patterns. So, what changes are you considering for that? And where would those go in your volume 1 design manual? Is that where that would go?
I'm going to quickly defer to Chad Edmondson.
Okay. Since he's been sitting,
Since
is
I'm
he here? or
not
he's
part of the
been-
development process.
Okay.
I believe he's virtual. Mr. Edmondson, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Can everybody hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Great. Yes, so our current stormwater policy, as all other jurisdictions in Maryland, follows the MDE, Maryland Department of Environment requirements. And MDE is currently updating the requirements for the larger storm, the larger, more frequent storm. Currently today, and periodically, they look at what the 1-year storm, the 10-year storm, the 100-year storm, and they change what those rainfall events are over time. We recently had a meeting, I believe it was last week, with MDE to discuss possible changes that they are currently working on. And I've heard rumors that the 1-year storm will be changed from 2.6 or 2.7 inches of rainfall, depending on where you are in the county, to a higher number, possibly 3.0 for that storm event. That storm event is chosen by MDE because it is the storm event that actually captures over 90% of the rainfall events that occur in any given year. So they are actually doing exactly what is being talked about here and reevaluating what the intensities and rainfall depths are based on these climatic changes that are occurring over long periods of time. Once they do it, we will adopt that requirement.
Okay, thank you. Liz?
There's nothing that prevents the county from going ahead and doing it in advance, though. I mean, why we continue to wait for something that we all know needs to happen, I don't understand.
Mr. Edmondson?
If that's a question, I'm just saying we change things based on what the data is showing, and that data is being evaluated. So if the county is going to propose a change, I would hope we'd have the data to back it up. I couldn't tell you whether the current storm event is 2.7 or 3 or 3.2. I don't know. They have the data.
Thank you. Okay, next I had on here, continue to use green stormwater infrastructure, bioretention swales, as well as pipes and ponds to address flooding. So I was wondering, where do we, are this green infrastructure, is it built into our design manual? Is it built into regulations? Where do we see that now? And how can we strengthen that for the future?
That's what our environmental site design is. When it talks about things like bioretention and swales, that's environmental site design. And so the action is to continue using that in combination with, the other approach of gray infrastructure, which we've talked about also in terms of ESD, and
Right,
you
I
need
saw
holding
that.
facilities for flood management.
So your environmental site design, somebody puts in their site plan, do you automatically go through it to say you should make this more environmentally friendly? Are there rules that they look at ahead of time to put those sorts of bioswales, green infrastructure in their site plan? How does that work?
That's a Chad
Can I
Edmondson
continue on
question.
that?
Okay, Chad. And Susan just said that's a Chad Edmondson question.
Great. So when MDE makes changes, then we adopt those changes as part of our code. After it's adopted as part of the code, then the design manual volume 1 is changed to incorporate, it's more of let's call it the cookbook of how to do it. Or volume 1 shows how to do it, how much and how big and deep and all those types of requirements. So those are the changes that have to change on paper. Then we incorporate those ESD practices into the design, whether it's redevelopment, whether it's green development, and we, over time, make modifications to what MDE requires. MDE has details for bioretention facilities, and we have changed those details over time. We require the 1-year event, so we stay with the 2.6-inch rainstorm or the 4.9 10-year storm drain design, but we change the design sometimes that works better. When ESD, I'll give you an example, when ESD first started in 2010, we had issues with flooding. It took a few years for things to get built, but we found that the bioretention facilities were filling and overflowing too quickly. We were seeing that the water wasn't making it through the soil down into the stone underneath these facilities where the underdrain was allowed to discharge the water. So we, in 2013, changed our design that required more stone, and it also required a second means of a pipe, we'll call it, just to get the water down to the stone, because it wasn't getting there, and that was part of the design volume, so the facilities were overflowing. Since that time, the facilities, the phone calls, let's call them the phone calls, stopped coming in saying, hey, my facility is overflowing every time it rains. So I think it balanced out the volumes that were required as for what was actually designed and put out in the field. So we do make those changes, and we actually increase the volume of storage slightly over what MDE required in these bios. We also talked a couple moments ago about what do we call it, the sexy permeable pavements. You know, they do work, but they have limits. You know, where we have public utilities or water lines, we want to be cautious on putting permeable pavement with stone underneath, because when the water infiltrates, it follows those storm drain pipes and water lines on the outside of the line like a conduit. So we have to be careful where we put them. We actually don't allow them in where we have public utilities. Plus, there's issues with soils. Anybody dig a hole here in Howard County, usually you hit clay within a few inches. And if you start putting a permeable pavement with stone, basically a reservoir of stone to collect water, and it can't get out, then all you're doing is running water through stone voids and then discharging it very quickly somewhere, as opposed to running it through a bioretention facility, which has a filter media, cleaning it, attenuating that peak discharge time to spread that discharge out and slow it down. So there's a lot to go into it. It's not just digging a hole or throwing some rock into it. And we make those changes over time with going. We have made some pretty good changes over the years.
Thank you for that very thorough description. Appreciate that. Liz, did you have a follow-up?
I do not.
Okay. Let's see. We have 28 more minutes, and I have 5 more pages. So, although you'll be glad to know that I have very few questions on the last few pages. So let's see. Watershed
Councilmember-
management plan.
Councilmember Young, are we able to take maybe just a 5-minute
Sure.
break? Okay.
Sure.
Thank
We
you.
could take a 5-minute break.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. And then we'll stop, I think, then we'll stop around 12:05. How's that sound? And then we'll come back and do fiscal analysis. Okay, great. Okay. All right, we are back again. All right, where did we leave off? We left off at Chad Edmondson describing the engineering wonders of bioretention ponds. Thank you, Chad. Appreciate that. And why that is better than permeable pavement. So that was good too. All good to know. All right. So well, I guess it's a slightly different thing. Watershed management plans. That's where I'm going next. Expand the scope of watershed management plans and set priorities for protecting, restoring, and improving environmental resources. And then you go to the technical appendix A, and that includes the water quality in local streams and how impervious cover and forest cover impacts watershed health. And I guess, again, this is a question for, I know that this is a general plan, and it's not a specific plan, so I'll keep saying that. But what kinds of things can we do that haven't already been pursued? I mean, I think about, again, some of the bills that Liz has introduced that would have protected our watersheds, at least the Patapsco watershed. And I'm just wondering what else, and would have protected the steep slopes and the buffers and created larger buffers along the Patapsco. And those bills failed. So what could we do that might actually be successful?
Well, I think having the funding for more restoration projects within watersheds. I think if the goal is in the end to improve stormwater health as a part of these watershed plans, restoration projects are beneficial. I don't know if of course, there's always, and I think we talk about it in the next section if we revisit that, expanding tree canopy and forest cover, also very beneficial. And Susan, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, part of the expansion of the watershed management plans is to set priorities for resource protection, and that could include setting goals for forest cover, riparian forest buffers, tree canopy coverage within those. And I know I mentioned this before, but our watershed management planning is underway. So Public Works has a long list of restoration projects they could be implementing to continue moving forward with improving water quality.
I think I'm just going to follow through on the trees rather than restoration, because I think we've.
Well,
maybe-
restoration includes things like stormwater retrofits,
okay.
tree planting,
I thought we were
stream
talking about
buffer
streamwater
planting, as well
restoration
as
again.
stream and wetland restoration.
Okay, so we're talking about wetland restoration and stormwater restoration. What else?
Retrofits and adding new stormwater management, maintenance and repair.
And replanting forest as well, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, planting forests, but that means that we've taken them down, which,
Well, sometimes for watershed management plans, they identify areas that could be replanted to forest, depending on the conditions in the watershed.
So, where would those things go? Would those things go into regulations? Would they go into design manuals? Would they go, where would those words be put on paper?
So I think specifically as it pertains to restoration projects, right, they would be recognized as a priority in the general plan, and then through a capital budgeting process, we would fund those. And then the other aspects as it pertains to establishing tree canopy goals. I mean, we do give guidance here in the plan that we should evaluate establishing tree canopy goals, but then to kind of actually then, where would that where would that goal be located once it's established? Is that your question?
That is, yeah, I have a big asterisk by that. Okay. Yeah, where are those tree canopy goals going to be written down, and how can we ensure that they are being followed, and what kind of regulation do we put in place to ensure that a tree canopy goal is being followed? And what do we do when somebody says, well, I want to cut down, what do we do when the county says, I'm going to cut down half the acreage of what we've got this year and in terms of lost forests? Do we say to our county, no, you can't do that?
Well, again, the watershed management plans can be used to set forest and tree canopy and forest riparian buffers by watershed, set goals for that, so it can go in the watershed management plans. Rec and Parks has an overall goal of 40% tree forest cover, tree canopy forest cover, and they use that to guide their programs. And then once those goals are established, then you have tree planting programs within recreation and parks to help with private property plantings. You have implementation plans and watershed management plans.
So where are the watershed management plans? Are they?
They're done in Public Works and Mark Richmond's section.
Okay, so and are those aren't in regulations anywhere. They're just, here's our watershed management plan. These are the things that we want to, these are our goals. And then every year when the budget comes up, Mark says, this is what we need to do in order to meet our goals.
And to meet our NPDS stormwater permit, yes,
Okay,
which requires watershed management.
right,
Restoration
right,
plans.
right, right. But it doesn't right now have a goal for the replanting of trees in the watershed management plans, or it does?
We should ask Mark, but I don't think we do right now.
Come back up here. I see him. You thought you were done, Mark. One could hope. One could.
The watershed plans that we prepared do not specifically have tree planting goals. The bulk of what came out of the watershed plans was capital projects, whether it's stream restoration, whether it's bioretention, whether it was geared towards a water quality as opposed to a water quantity approach. So we were looking for basically any and every project that could possibly improve water quality. Some of them treated a very small area and just wouldn't, it was not efficient to do those. A lot of them were on private property, and that kind of falls into the bucket of we need an easement, or we need agreement, or we need a community to agree that we can come in and do something right next to their house.
Right.
And that's not as easy as one would think.
No, it's not. We can't even get a sidewalk. You know
Yeah.
that. Let alone something much bigger than that. Yes.
Right. So the watershed management plans we have has, I'd go as far as saying hundreds of projects. Not all of them are feasible or cost-effective or going to provide sufficient water quality to make them a truly viable project to move forward with compared to some other things that we could do.
So if you wanted to add trees to the watershed plan, and I'm not saying you would be the one in charge of the trees, okay, but somebody would be in charge of the trees. Somebody would be in charge of how many trees do we try and save? What's the goal for the number of trees we try to save? Who is in charge of saving the trees? Where would we put that? Would that be in the Office of Community Sustainability? Who would be in charge of saving the trees?
Recreation and Parks is going to be generally the people implementing that. Office of Sustainability will help with some guidance to that end, maybe geographically, where should this kind of work be done, for example, which would play right into watershed planning. So, for example, in the last year, OCS has provided funding for Recreation and Parks to contract out about $90,000 worth of forest management. So this is mostly removing invasive species to protect the tree canopy, which is a topic that probably doesn't come up enough, right? So planting new trees
agreed. And I just want you to know, this is okay, China Williams, we're looking right now at you. My staffer is invasives, bad. Yes.
So surely all the new tree planting is important, but equally important is keeping what we already have. This is even outside of development processes. So we've been working with Rec and Parks to do more forest restoration work in the Green Infrastructure Network this last year and in areas where there are underserved communities. So just to point out, this is some proactive work, and this is above and beyond what's required through the development process. This isn't just meeting obligations or using fee and lieu money. This is additional money allocated to proactively address our forest canopy, which of course plays a direct role in stormwater management to everywhere downstream.
I'm going to interrupt myself before I ask another follow-up. And Liz, did you have a question?
I had the same question you did, and I'm not sure we have the answer yet, which is where do we put these tree canopy goals? Is it in the climate action plan? Is it in this HOCO by design? Is it in those watershed master plans? I mean, where is it so that we know that's the goal and we're tracking it ideally by watershed?
Actually, that was the follow-up I was going to ask too. So I had the same follow-up. I want to see the number and know that each year we can say, oh, this number was met, this number wasn't met. This is how many this is what we're looking at long-term, short-term. And it just sounds like there's an overall thought process here as to wanting to ensure that the watershed is not only being protected from the quality of water that's going through it, but also the need to preserve our trees. And
Yeah, can I?
yeah.
I'm going to attempt,
Yeah.
I'm not going to have a direct answer for you, but I'm going to have options, I think.
Okay, good.
So within the general plan, we do talk about expanding the use, as you know, of the watershed management plans. And the first implementing action is to expand the scope of watershed management plans to set priorities and guide efforts to protect, restore, and improve county environmental resources. So if we're not going to be updating those watershed management plans anytime in the near future, if that's not the most appropriate place for it, then yes, it is a goal that DPZ could potentially create. We could work in collaboration with Office of Community Sustainability to set that in to specify that goal in a different plan. So I think that we'd have to determine where's the most appropriate place to locate that goal once we establish it.
Excellent. Those are good options. I like that. Liz?
Let's move on to the next step. Can I ask a question, Deb?
Yes.
Or you're going in some order that I have not gleaned after these many hours.
I'm just going in order of the information in the chapter.
Oh, that's very.
From page 1 to page 57.
Well, I like to skip around. But you have, in the process of doing that, you basically asked each of my questions. I feel like in all of these work sessions, I always have the question that where is X subject? And for this chapter 3, I didn't see, well, actually I have 2 questions. I didn't see reference to light or noise pollution. Deb already brought up, the plane and the particulate matter, that concern. I see noise and light pollution in other sections talking about quality by design and headlights and stuff, but not just, we get emails all the time about, again, county buildings being all lit up in the middle of the night for no reason and potentially disrupting migration of birds and other things. Noise pollution, light pollution. I don't see a whole lot of talk about solar. I see a whole lot of talk about fossil fuels bad, but in our area, the only way that we eliminate that use is either make our buildings more efficient or go to solar, right? We're not going to do hydro power, wind power. We got to do solar here. So I would have thought this would be the chapter where we talk about where we're siting projects, whether we're pushing stuff onto rooftops, that kind of discussion. And then I had a third one. Well, actually, you just got on it with Bill, this notion of protecting existing canopies from invasives, but also what we are planning. Is it no-mow? Are there places that we want to only, use native? Like that kind of discussion, I didn't see a whole lot of in this ecological health chapter. Is there a reason?
No, we didn't address noise and light pollution in the ecological health chapter. I'm not sure it's addressed in other chapters either. Yeah, and then for, what was the next one?
The more sort of no-mow, tree canopy, other types of elements that it sounded like would be most appropriately addressed in the climate action plan.
Right, solar energy.
Solar energy.
Those things would be addressed in the climate action plan.
I saw that there was a mention of solar energy in your ecological health chapter where you said we should put it on rooftops. We should do more rooftop solar, but I don't know. I would think that, I certainly would agree with Liz here that maybe we should focus a little bit more on that. It's a good thing that Mr. Youngman isn't here.
Well,
Though I'm sure his staff will tell him I said that. But I do, Liz is right. We're not going to be doing hydropower. If we're going to be doing any kind of renewable energy, our best bet really is solar. So if there could be a little more of an emphasis on getting solar energy on buildings and in places where, and maybe this also could go into the section on encouraging our community to be more aware of all these things so that maybe more community members would put in solar and pollinator plants and bioswales themselves and do more mulching, not, grass sort of mulching, or get rid of their grass and, all the things that we've been looking at that help our environment.
Yeah, so all of that is, again, just kind of broad guidance that you would find within Environmental Health Policy 2. I mean, that's an example of how we could seek to integrate climate change mitigation adaptation goals and all county policies and programs. So specifically looking at ways, Action 2 says evaluate and enhance opportunities where needed for climate change mitigation adaptation measures in the subdivision land development zoning regulations, such as natural resource protection and the provision of renewable energy. So there is a broad guidance saying that we need to seek opportunities to expand the provision of renewable energy. And then specific to things like, pollinators, there is a policy statement that is back in the environmental stewardship section where we're looking to commit and support the county's designation as Obesity USA.
Right.
So some of that would be integrating pollinator-friendly practices into county policies and programs and capital projects, incorporate improvements in the county's pest management policies and practices as they relate to pollinator conservation. And also, I think a lot of that is also, we dive in a little more deeply to those aspects with the, if I could just, again, call it out the Climate Action Plan. And then we can further elaborate on all of that once we update the landscape manual.
So, okay, that's another place then, the landscape manual. Okay. I just want to make sure that we're all of this, because these are a lot of wonderful ideas, and that all of these are going to land somewhere other than just in the general plan with more specificity.
And I do just want to add on, so a lot of what we talked about in the ecological health chapter is really the microgrid, the on-site, and that's like the local solar generation, but that's at a very local level. Obviously, we source power from a regional network, and so that's when you can really tap into the other alternatives. So you might not be citing hydro here, you might not be citing windmills necessarily, but you're still tapping into a wider network that could utilize those since we have a regional power grid system.
Right, and I know that at one point, the Office of Community Sustainability looked at our energy buy contracts to see how green or how brown they were. And they did take action. I can't remember if the action they took was to use less of that energy under that specific contract, or if it was to push the energy providers to try and use more green energy providers. But there was something positive that came out of that review. So that was a good thing. And that was as a result of a constituent who just kept coming and coming and coming and coming at that issue. So that was good. Liz, did you have any other follow-ups for this?
No, I just have one last question, Deb, overall, and it regards open space. There's a map somewhere that shows all of the open space. And I think, right, Ms. Kendall, you mentioned it was 49 or 39% in the county. Does that open space include things like stormwater retention facilities on new developments?
This is the 39% of the land that's been already permanently preserved or protected in the county?
Right.
Okay. We do have a specific list of what was included in that evaluation. It's a combination of anything that's under an agricultural and environmental preservation easement, land that is, we have it in our, we're just trying to pull up the specifics that were incorporated into that calculation. Some of it is land that is under easement for WSSC. And then what was your question, Councilmember Walsh? I'm sorry, what were you specifically asking about?
I'm just worried that we're overcounting properties in that in that measure. And I know of at the very detailed level on a, site by site basis, if you're calling the stormwater retention facility open space and counting that measure for each new development in part of that 39, then that's a problem for me. I thought I read somewhere in chapter 3 that there was this notion of rethinking how we do open space. But I'm concerned about the measure, and then if there are recommendations that we reconsider how we measure and allow uses on open space, what that recommendation would be in this plan.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you with regards to whether or not specifically stormwater management facilities are included in that open space calculation. So we're happy to follow up with you after the work session to get you that answer.
Okay, and so here I found it. It's on my page EH5. God knows what that means on yours, but it says exploring opportunities for enhanced, flexible open spaces and site planning requirements. I mean, I'm thinking of Elk Crossing that has virtually no open space. They're considering the land in a roundabout. I say land. They're considering the mowed grass in a roundabout at one point in time as part of their open space, and the stormwater pond is open space that's largely inaccessible to anyone that is not some kind of wetlands plant. But that is concerning to me because I see, especially with enhanced stormwater regulations, that we're eating up landmass. And now if we're patting ourselves on the back for having so much so-called open space, and it's largely, our own built infrastructure to deal with what we're otherwise putting in place, I don't think that's a fair comment. So I read that first sentence or phrasing to suggest that you all were recommending some rethinking there, and I would have welcomed that.
If stormwater management, open space that's reserved for stormwater management, if that's a part of the calculation, it would be a very small portion of that calculation, especially when you look at the total number of acres that have been preserved through environmental and agricultural conservation easements. When it comes to creating open space in our more developed areas in the county, I mean, I guess I would sort of look to some of our character area descriptions within the character area appendix and look at our future land use map and just say that there are open space goals and descriptions and green space goals for all of our, a good number of our character areas moving forward in the future. So generally speaking, I think open space and green space is intended to continue to be a part of our future.
Okay. All right. I'll check in with you guys once we see how it's been compiled. Okay. That's all I have, Deb. I'm done.
Okay, I only have one more question, and then we're going to take a 25-minute lunch break. Is there more than one place in this county that does mineral extraction? I only know of one. I'm just curious. Are there two?
I'm
are
sorry,
they both
there are two
quarries?
places. Mm-hmm.
And I know the one quarry is next to the new Guilford Park High School. Mm-hmm. Where's the other one?
It's on the north side of Howard County, northeast, I believe. There's a small quarry up there just before you cross over the Patapsco.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you guys for all of your answers and your patience and walking us through this. And we'll see you in half an hour, at least some of you.
Yeah.
And some of you are now excused for the rest of the day. But we appreciate your participation. We really do.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just confirm, so we'll all be back at 12:30?
Well, maybe let's do 12:35.
12:35.
Okay, let's
Okay.
give ourselves a full half an hour. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.